Part 1, A Brief History.
Italian Gothic architecture was created by the many different independent city-states in Italy. It started in the 12th century and it was inspired by classical culture. It spanned over 300 years between the 12th century and 15th century. It was started by the Cistercian monks and was seen as more restrictive from the rule of the Benedictines. Led to certain architectural styles that put greater focus on the functionality of the building, rather than entirely focusing on the aesthetic authenticity. It ended up passing up the period of the Renaissance. Many architects from Italy preferred to keep similar construction methods that had been established from the previous years of the country, and many solutions and innovations that hadn't been commonplace yet. The spread of Italian Gothic was originally resisted by the Cistercians, but had been revolted from the church because they preferred an earlier style of architecture. The Italian Gothic style was a combined style of Romanesque and Gothic. Romanesque is identified by monumental quality, solidity, and strength, where it was based on early basilicas or churches in the early 6th century to 10th century. Gothic architecture, on the other hand, is characterized by spiritual transcendence through tall structures of light that evoke emotional civic pride. Due to its high prominence in Italy, the style started to become in use in Northern Europe. When used in Northern Europe, many ideals of construction and decoration were changed to suit local architectural tradition. Many regions had used stone as it was the most common building material, but in terms of style, brick was needed because it allowed Italy to showcase vaults and pointed arches within the architecture. Marble as well became a widely used building material because many had decided to use it on decorational buildings or architecture. In terms of its decoration of the building, many Italian architects used polychrome within both the inside and outside of the building or architecture. The style was primarily used for churches and cathedrals, as the style itself lent well to building ideals of religious buildings. Examples include the Santa Maria sopra Minerva, which was conceived in 1280 but not fully finished until the 14th century, when the side aisles of the building were finished. Basilica di San Pedrino is considered to be one of the most attractive pieces of Italian Gothic architecture, as the interior is the 4th biggest amongst any church in Italy. Milan Cathedral, another example, had begun in the late 14th century and was considered at the time one of the most ambitious Italian Gothic architecture because it adapted many structural features of French Gothic and new features of Italian Gothic, like the flying buttresses and arched rib vaults. Most buildings like these cathedrals were able to withstand the wear and tear of time without the need of high maintenance. This was due to the pointed arches and columns that allowed for stable support. Sometimes identifying an Italian Gothic building can be difficult, as they could be similar to the Romanesque, Renaissance, or Baroque. Italian Gothic has buildings that were created within 500 to 900 years ago. Although some buildings may appear to withhold a certain style years later that may have added upon similar styles to maintain the building. To fully identify the interior, always look up towards the ceiling, as rib vaults identify the structure in terms of Italian Gothic. Another major identification is from the lack of a freestanding bell tower and the very location of where the building is perched upon. Italian Gothic was able to transcend a period and influence many ideals up towards the Renaissance, which was highly regarded compared to the Italian Gothic.
Part 2. Region.
Hello everyone, my name is Jose Ramirez, and my group has decided to talk about Italian Gothic architecture. When we say Gothic, we're not talking about Gothic style lettering or dark themes or scary places. And yes, we're not talking about Gotham City, where Batman lives. We're talking about Italian Gothic architecture, such as the one of the basilica that we're looking at. We're talking about architecture and the art in which a form of design is called or referred to as Gothic. So, to learn about Italian Gothic architecture, we need to go back to the beginning and see where it was first originated. It was first invented before the 12th century in France by the Cistercian monks. This is a picture from the 12th century from the Cistercian monks. Later, in the 12th century, Gothic architecture was introduced to Italy by the same monks and also to the rest of the Northern Europe countries. The first Italian Gothic architecture structures in Italy were the Cistercian churches that were built in the peninsula of Italy. The structures were simple and art was not welcome into their design. As we can see, these structures had a very little detail, and as we just mentioned, art was not welcome, so that's why they don't look so much detailed. But yet, we can see that they are very amazing. The expansion from the Cistercian churches went as far as Sicily, where they left an unfinished basilica, the Basilica of Morpurgo near Lentini. Then the Franciscans also appear, and they were founded by Saint Francis of Assisi. He created the Basilica of San Francisco of Assisi that was started in 1228 and finished in 1253. Later, another structure built by the Franciscans was the Church of San Gross in Florence, started in 1294. And so other Gothic architecture were built, like the first Gothic church in Rome. That was the Dominican Church of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. This church was a copy of the one in Florence, Santa Maria Novella. And so we can see how Gothic architecture started moving from the peninsula, from Sicily, moving upwards towards Rome and Florence and also Bologna, finishing in Venice as well. Other famous churches are the Church of San Fortunato in Todi from 1292 to 1328 and the San Lorenzo in Naples, which was built from 1270 to 1285. Another honorable mentions are the Duomo di Modena Cathedral in Modena and Duomo di Milan Cathedral. It was just a quick brief on the region of the Gothic architecture and how it moved from France to the peninsula of Italy, upwards all the way to Bologna and Venice. Now, I will pass on to one of my classmates so that they can continue with mentioning some of the important people, the characteristics, and what influence, how Gothic architecture influenced other movements. Thank you.
Part 3. Important people.
When you think of the Renaissance, you think of Leonardo da Vinci. When you think classical music, you think Beethoven. When you think basketball, you think Michael Jordan. When you think cooking, you think Anthony Bourdain. Whatever you may think of, there's always a certain name that pops up. But when you think of Italian Baroque, what is it that we think of? You don't think of much of something that you don't hear very too often. So when I was doing my research, when I looked up Italian Baroque, the names that popped up were Caravaggio, Andrea Pozzo, Guido Reni, Pietro da Cortana, all various Italian artists from the 17th century art period. Caravaggio was born and trained in Milan and stands as one of the most original and influential contributors to late 16th century and early 7th century European paintings. Caravaggio's work had the greatest impact and influence on other artists of this generation in the early formative days of the Baroque movement. He was particularly renowned by scholars and other artists for his dramatic and grand use of lighting as well as realistic portrayals of the human state concerning emotional and physical conditions and tribulations. Some paintings you might recognize by him are these right here, or these. The second artist, Andrea Pozzo, was an Italian, chooses his brother, Baroque painter, architect, decorator, stage designer, and theoretician. Pozzo was best known for his grandiose frescoes using the technique of quadrata to create an illusion of three-dimensional space on flat surfaces. His theoretical essay, Rules and Examples of Perspective Proper for Painters and Architects, was written between 1693 and 1698, one of the earliest manuals on perspective for artists and architects, and in fact was the starting point for the creation of all architectures and decorations characterized by illusory effects. Third artist, Guido Reni. Guido Reni was a widely acclaimed painter and draftsman in 17th century Italy, renowned for his elegant interpretations of religious and mythological scenes. Reni is best known for large-scale altarpieces, mythological scenes, and large-scale altarpieces, as well as single-figure, dimensional, and secular subjects. Reni developed a distinctive bright palette and refined brushwork, especially in his depiction of draped clothing, for which he was renowned. By the mid-1630s, his style has evolved, and his last works are characterized by a muted, limited palette and loose summary handling of paint and simplified compositions. His success led to one of the most active workshops in Europe, which housed up to 80 students at a time. The last artist, Pietro da Cortana, in combining architecture, painting, and sculpture to act on viewers' emotions, Pietro da Cortana was an influential practitioner of high Baroque style. Born in Cortana, he studied in Florence and then in Rome, learning to paint primarily by teaching himself. Pietro da Cortana once wrote that architect was only a pastime for him, but was second only to Gian Lorenzo Bernini amongst 17th century Roman architects. These artists, Caravaggio, Andrea Pozzo, Guido Reni, Pietro da Cortana, are artists that I believe should be talked about when Italian Baroque is brought up, because of one, how the art was not only limited to just art like oil on a canvas, it was also spread out to theater work, buildings, as well as home decor. This is why some of these art pieces are very beautiful as opposed to other Baroque periods, because they they essentially started the Baroque style that the Europeans took their influence from.
Part 4. Characteristics.
An example of structure heavily inspired by the Italian Gothic is the Cologne Cathedral from Germany, in which it inspired its builders to make it taller than the cathedrals that were built before it and the ones that were inspired by it, making it the tallest wind-inspired cathedral in the world. I'd say it's comparable to the Siena Gothic Cathedral in Italy, in which both have a comparable size and detail in its history. Both Siena and Cologne share a very detailed and ornamented facade. Both share features such as three doors, statues, sculptures, and those windows. However, both have a very evident differences in their facades. With Cologne having the pair of the tallest known spires in our cathedral, and these mostly decorated with a very intricately designed windows from its bottom to its very top. However, the Siena Cathedral has statues depicting philosophers, apostles, prophets, and stories of the Virgin Mary and Proud Son. It also has a framed religious artwork in front of above its front doors. Both cathedrals also shared history on their creators becoming overambitious with their plans, in which both cathedrals were planned to be the largest churches of their period. However, both cathedrals were left unfinished, in which one of them, the Siena Cathedral, was known to have its construction halted due to the plague. However, the Cologne Cathedral was left incomplete for 632 years. The cathedral was later rebuilt in 1842 for it to be completely built, while the Siena Cathedral was only meant to be one of the wings of the church, with the remnants of the planned main building of the structure was being used as a parking lot in the modern day. The Cologne Cathedral and the Siena Cathedral both have stained glass features. However, the Cologne Cathedral's stained glass windows were shattered during the Second World War. It was temporarily replaced with plain glass and was later replaced with new ones in 2007 with the help of Gerhard Richter. However, the replacement computer-made pixel-based design in the St. Francis windows became controversial to the point that new bishop did not attend its revealing. Another comparable features that the Cologne and the Siena doesn't have with each other is, while the Cologne Cathedral has a minimal detailing in its floors, the Siena Cathedral takes it to another level with intricate artworks depicting multiple biblical scenes in its floor created mostly by local artists with the use of graffito and marble inlays available in its region. The Siena Cathedral is also heavily decorated inside with multiple heavily carved sculptures, with one of them made by Donatello. One of the sculptures inside were marble statue copies of the heads of the Pope that reigned or is currently in reign at the time of its construction, which decorates the ceiling in which making them look down at the visitors. Its walls were both decorated with black and white striping pattern with multiple fresco paintings as well. Unlike the Siena, the Cologne Cathedral has less extravagant decorations in the interior. It might be in part of the many years of being incomplete, however, the lesser the additional details, the more the glowing stained glass goes to the viewer's eyes. Due to this, it makes the viewers focus on the artworks depicting the religious stories seen in the stained glass window more than the surroundings. While I did say the Cologne Cathedral has a minimal detailing in its interior, it still displays religious artworks such as paintings and sculptures. However, most of them having a similar coloring to its interior walls, church walls and pillars, the sculptures blend to its surroundings. Another notable differences between the Siena and the Cologne cathedrals is that the Siena Cathedral has a dome that gives light to its interior in the middle of the church, while the Cologne Cathedral has flying buttresses that direct rainwater from its roof away from its church foundations. Taking note of the reason why the Siena Cathedral was not completed due to the plague, it is evidently one of the reasons for it not to have one. When comparing these two cathedrals, while there are differences such as the Siena Cathedral looks much more extravagant of the two, it shows how much influence the Italian Gothic is evident outside Italy. Evident by how the architects of the Cologne Cathedral aim to be the tallest known facade on earth when compared to their neighboring regions and its shared features to its predecessors.
Part 5. Influence on other periods.
I'm going to cover the influence that Gothic architecture had on art following the 12th century. Key components taken from the Gothic architecture buildings consist of an overall enormous statue, high arch ceilings from within, and large stained glass windows. These elements can be seen present in many cathedrals and churches following the 12th century. Most notably, these elements can be seen in the Siena Cathedral with its tall pointed ceiling and large centered window from the outside. Gothic architecture played a huge role in inspiring Renaissance architects, as they intended to express humanist values. Influenced by classic antiquity, Renaissance architects implemented symmetry and harmony motifs within their structures to emphasize the potentials that human could achieve. The San Pietro in Monterio was instructed to Renaissance architects to build, and their Gothic inspiration is visible through the church's dome and the intricacies surrounding the structure. Rivaling the Renaissance era of brilliance is the Baroque period. The continuous influence of classical antiquity and Italian Gothic architecture is most prominent in Baroque architecture. Baroque architects aim to create grand theatrical structures to emphasize the impressiveness of these structures. The initial drive for most of the grand structures of this era was to express God's glory and adoration. The Trevi Fountain is an incredible work of architecture and far exceeds the structures made in past eras that also take inspiration from Italian Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture not only influenced architecture, but also other areas of art through its religious motifs and the elaborateness that goes into these Gothic structures. For example, the Annunciation of St. Margaret and St. Anselmus, as well as the Gates of Paradise, were created to capture and complement the intricacies of Gothic architecture. In these paintings, the use of gold emphasizes the glory and grace that cathedrals represented. Another example is in Vermeer's cityscape painting View of Death. He captures a mundane scene with suggested religious motifs being the clouds parting the heavens and letting sunlight shine over the church where he would eventually be buried. Another example of Gothic architecture influence would be Monet, who would create a series of 30 paintings of the Gothic Roman cathedral. He was infatuated with the way light interacted with the cathedral, so he decided to capture the same monument on different days of different years, attempting to accurately capture the beauty Gothic architecture initially aimed for. Many artists would be inspired by Gothic architecture in different ways, but ultimately it was to promote the primary goal. Italian Gothic architecture's influence impacted many art movements as well as contemporary structures. For example, Christian and Catholic churches have sustained the test of time and have never changed to fit modern times. Newly built churches still take influence from Italian Gothic architecture and classic antiquity due to its insisted themes and dogmatic beliefs Christianity instills. Gothic architecture's influence is also responsible for today's large skyscrapers and other structures that are composed of elaborate decorations or large windows. These elements were first seen in Gothic architecture. An example of this is the Michael Leach in Crystal, which is an extension of the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada. This extension of the museum blends classic antiquity with the abstract progressiveness of contemporary architecture, ultimately bringing full circle the Gothic architecture's influence on architecture as a whole.
Part 6. We're excited.